good news and I have bad news. The good news is that Modern Horizons 3 is one of the most fun commander sets we've seen in years. But the bad news is that the commanders you build from this set might break the power of your pod. Shilgengar, Sire of Famine is a perfect example of why. Today we'll be breaking down the new commander Shilgengar from Modern Horizons 3. We'll do a full deck tech around a fun and busted way to build it, highlighting all the cards that will make this strategy super strong. And at the end, we'll break down the best ways to play it, and of course, how to consistently win with it. This commander is strong, as in I don't know how anyone brews this commander in low power. Almost everything that you need to dominate is on the card itself. Shilgengar, Sire of Famine is a 5-drop for 3 generic and 2 black, but its color identity as a commander is black and white. And of course, it's a 6/6 because, you know, flavor. Of course, it has flying. Its first ability reads, sacrifice another creature, create a blood token. If you sacrifice an angel this way, create a number of blood tokens equal to its toughness instead. And the second ability reading, pay 3 white or black, sacrifice 6 blood tokens. Return each creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Those creatures are vampires in addition to their other types. But what exactly do these finality counters actually do? A finality counter makes it so if a permanent would go to the graveyard, it would be exiled instead. I want to stop here and just call out how easy it is to get rid of these finality counters on your creatures. Given this commander has access to all of White's blink cards, we're able to very easily break this ability and push the power to its limits. This blink strategy is not the only way to build Shilgengar. However, we do feel that it is one of the most powerful ways to do so. So let's slay some angels and blink them to high heaven. What's so fun about this deck is that the playstyle is a bit unique. It's a nice mix of blink and graveyard sacrifice. We're obviously running a black ramp package, but we're also running an awesome white ramp package as well. One that more mono white and dual white decks should always consider running. The goal of this deck is to control the board state with your angels and non-angel creatures, then repeat over and over and over again. But it is important to call out that there is a Kindred Angel sub-theme in this deck. This is obviously great for making a ton of blood tokens, but flooding the board with angels is also a viable strategy to win. This can be an awesome pivot plan if you keep getting hit by graveyard hate or having your commander removed. For anyone who doesn't know what blink is, it's a strategy where you temporarily exile your creatures and return them back to the battlefield. This will trigger any of those creatures enter and or leave the battlefield abilities, while also effectively countering any spells or abilities that were targeting the creatures to begin with. These triggers provide tons of extra value and make up the basis of a popular archetype / theme in Magic. The more creatures you can blink, the more busted the outcomes become, often resulting in loops that can make your board state a challenge for your opponents to deal with. I really love that Shilgengar is a self-contained engine for this deck. It has a way to both freely sacrifice creatures and then reanimate them. These two powerful effects are often found on separate cards. The sack outlet is free and can be used anytime your creatures are being targeted. If someone tries to remove a creature, you'll likely want to respond by sacking it and getting blood tokens. This is especially great if your creature is being targeted with an exile spell. Getting 6 blood tokens in this deck is quite easy, and by the time that you've cast your first angel, you've often played enough sacrifice fodder to start doing whatever reanimate shenanigans you need. Ideally, you'll get a creature with a mass exile effect, like Lumbering Battlement, and a creature with a normal blink effect, like Guardian of Gaipor, in your graveyard either by playing and sacrificing or discarding them to blood tokens. This will make it so when you activate Shilgengar's mass reanimate ability, you are able to have the mass exile effect exile all of the other creatures, then the blink effect will hit the remaining creature, causing all the exiled creatures to come back without their finality counters, in addition to triggering all of their enter the battlefield effects a second time. Once this engine is online, it's going to require your opponents to get creative on actually how to slow you down. And this is all because Shilgengar's ability can be activated at instant speed. Given so much of the engine of this deck is self-contained on the card itself, let's first break down its abilities. Like I said, Shilgengar can do everything at instant speed. One of my personal favorite commanders, Balthor the Defiled, is similar in a sense that you can reanimate your entire graveyard at instant speed. However, Balthor is then exiled after doing this ability. This means that you won't want to activate Balthor unless you're getting back a ton of value, given you're having to replay Balthor again with commander tax to do so. But with Shilgengar, it stays on the battlefield, so you can either reanimate in mass or even get a couple of creatures back that you discard from using your blood tokens. Unlike Balthor, slow and steady can often win the race. Since Shilgengar gives you a bunch of extra blood tokens when you sacrifice angels, you often only need to sacrifice 2 or 3 creatures to get that juicy 6 blood cost. What's so critical to call out is that you can activate this ability with ease. So let's say that you sack a handful of creatures till Shilgengar. An opponent attempts to remove your commander before you can activate the ability. But wait, you can activate activate it in response to return a creature that can blink and save Shilgengar, and you can even respawn by sacking more creatures as you get even more value. You'll want to be strategic about timing your reanimations in order to keep your opponents on their toes. It's pretty wild to see so much of this value engine self-contained on a single card. What a time to be a Commander player. Given our game plan is going to be bringing back and blinking our creatures a ton, let's break down some of the blood-filled baddies that we have in this deck. We're running close to 40 creatures in this deck. Half of them are angels and the other half are to support the blink strategy of great ETBs, aka enter the battlefield effects. In the early game, you'll want to prioritize getting some of your best sacrifice fodder out onto the battlefield. A turn 2 or turn 3 Righteous Valkyrie could be an incredible start. A nice cheap little angel that can be sacked to Shilgengar in future turns. But it also has whenever another angel or cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. As long as you have at least 7 life more than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2. Yeah, that's gonna be incredible in this deck. Guardian of Gaipor, a 3/3 angel for 3 is also great. It temporarily exiles one of your creatures or artifacts you control until the next end step, helping set up future blink shenanigans, and eventually helping a strategy that will get rid of all of your finality counters. Sarah Paragon is also awesome for graveyard recursion in this deck, allowing you to play a land or cast a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. Whatever you bring back does essentially have a finality counter on it, but blinking that permanent can also save it from being exiled for good. Amiria Shepherd can return any non-land permanent to play whenever we play a Plains, and since we are playing so many fetch lands in our deck, we can also get this effect at instant speed, which is incredibly powerful. Another great angel recursion card is Shepherd of the Cosmos. When Shepherd of the Cosmos enters the battlefield, return target permanent card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is great for getting back small creatures, but it's also fantastic for getting back any of our 10 fetch lands. Now, Angel of Serenity on face value has recursion. However, Angel of Serenity is more involved in this deck and is not best used for this recursion. When it leaves, the cards return to their owner's hands rather than play. It's important to note that this ETB is a separate effect from the LTB, leave the battlefield effect. So if you blink or sack it in response to the ETB, then you will permanently exile anything when that initial ETB resolves, since the LTB trigger has already resolved. This is not explicitly explained on the card, but this is how the rules play out when a card like this, that has an ETB that is separate from its LTB, is blinked or sacked before the ETB trigger resolves. And since our commander is a sack outlet and most of our reanimated creatures will include a blink effect, this ETB is generally just used as ETB permanently exile 3 creatures, as in your opponent's creatures. Eat it! Not angels, but Lenin, Relic Warden, and Fiend Hunter are also great ways to abuse this type of effect. Lyra Dawnbringer is fantastic given it pumps all of your other angels and gives them lifelink. This is a card that will dominate in the air and keep your life gain triggers going. Speaking of life gain, we have Archangel of Thrune. Look, I already know that people are going to be in the comment section yelling at me to add Solemnity to this deck. Hey everybody, this guy forgot to put Solemnity in his deck! But a card like Archangel of Thrune is one of a few cards of why you would not want to run a card like Solemnity in this deck. Plus there's another non-Solemnity card later that I'll show you that's even more fun. Seriously, just this one card we'll talk about later is more fun than Solemnity could ever be. Sure, Solemnity is an easy way to deal with finality counters, but it will have a big target on it if any of the other players at the table want to do anything with counters. Do not expect Solemnity to be well liked at any pod, and never count on it to last that long at any table. But if you want to put it in your deck, you know what? Just go off, King. I ain't gonna judge ya. You freak. Angel of Ruins is awesome utility, giving us ways to both plane cycle and exile opponents' enchantments and artifacts. You should absolutely feel comfortable cycling this card early because you can reanimate it later to Shilgengar's second ability. Safara, Sky's Blade, is a beast in this deck, giving all of our angels and other flyers indestructible. And outside of that, it's a 7/7 with flying and lifelink, plus a way to reduce the cost of casting it by tapping flyers. Awesome, man. The angels in this deck all have synergistic ETBs or LTBs that pair well with Shilgengar. Every creature provides some type of value that would otherwise be found on an instant or a sorcery spell. So yes, the angels in this deck are going to be consistently getting us value, but even if someone removes the blinking and reanimation engine coming from Shilgengar, the angels in this deck are often enough to win you the game by themselves. Having a bunch of high value evasive flyers can take over any game. If an opponent finds a way to get around our ability to blink Shilgengar, then leading into these angels can still be a powerful plan B. But enough about angels, now let's look at some of the non-angel creatures in this deck. All of our non-angel creatures are also helping the blink strategy of this deck. The ETB and LTB triggers will help keep this deck running efficiently. Charming Prince is a white blink all-star, a 2/2 for 1 generic and 1 white. Blinking this multiple times throughout a game gives us flexibility and high value. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose 1, scry 2, gain 3 life, or exile another target creature you control, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. An awesome value for only being a 2-drop. A card with similar flexibility is Callous Blood Mage. This gives us plenty of options throughout the course of a game. A 3-drop for 2 generic and 1 black. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. You draw a card and lose 1 life, or exile target player's graveyard. Speaking of exiling a graveyard, we have to call out another new card from Modern Horizons 3, Bogart Trawler, a multi-facing land card. The creature side has an ability that states, when it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. Bojuka Bog on a creature is a huge upgrade for a blink deck like this. Of course, we're running a package of classic blink removal, Lorn of the Third Path for artifacts and enchantment removal, and a similar and new amazing card is Witch Enchanter, another great multi-facing card from Modern Horizons 3. Ravenous Chupacabra is a classic blink creature for targeted creature removal, and the new Accursed Marauder to force everyone to sacrifice a non-token creature. This card is essentially the new Fleshbag Marauder, again another new Modern Horizons 3 card. It is absolutely worth picking up a few of these if you're playing damn near any black deck that loves sending things to the graveyard. Ocelot Pride is a new card from Modern Horizons 3 that is looking like an instant all-star. A 1/1 cat creature for 1 white. It has first strike, lifelink, and ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. Stay blessed, my friends. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, create a 1/1 white creature token. If you have the city's blessing, for each token you control that enter the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. This doesn't just double our creature tokens we make, but it also doubles all of the blood tokens we make on a turn as well. Life gain is fairly easy in our colors of white and black. A card like Bishop of Wings is perfect for accelerating this, and a card that probably couldn't be more synergistic to our commander. A 1/4 human cleric for 2 white. Whenever an angel enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. Hell yeah. Whenever an angel you control dies, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So much value in this one card. More life gain synergy is good old Vito Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, also giving us a way to give our creatures lifelink until end of turn. This is a very powerful win con in this deck. Paired with Bishops of Wings, Righteous Valkyrie, or Lyra Dawnbringer is often enough to take somebody out. The Bishop and Valkyrie both work as a big ETB blast if you mass reanimate with Vito on the battlefield. Now there are some awesome creatures that trigger from blood tokens entering the battlefield, and these can add a ton of value. Baron Bettram Greywater from Thunder Junction is nice. A 3/4 vampire noble for 2 generic, 1 white and 1 black. Whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 black vampire rogue creature token with lifelink. This ability triggers only once each turn. This will allow you to create a free blood token on each player's turn because you can just sack a vampire to make a blood and then get another vampire. Essentially 4 free blood tokens per turn cycle. For 1 generic and 1 black, you can also sacrifice another creature or artifact to draw a card. A great way to turn our blood tokens into more cards. Another is Thalis Reverent Medium, a 3/4 human cleric for 3 generic, 1 white and 1 black. At the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of tokens you've created this turn. A nice way to create a bunch of little flyers each turn, noting that these can refill your sacrifice fodder and accelerate your blood token engine. Similar to Baron Bettram Greywater, this can net you free blood tokens on each player's turn, but Thalis can generate free blood tokens for each spirit we sacrifice instead of just 1 per turn. Now I really want to double down on Thief of Blood. This is the other reason why we are not running Solemnity in this deck, because Thief of Blood is 10 times more fun than Solemnity could ever be. Thief of Blood is a 1/1 vampire for 4 generic and 2 black. As Thief of Blood enters the battlefield, remove all counters from all permanents. Thief of Blood enters the battlefield with +1/+1 counters on it for each counter removed this way. If this is part of a big reanimation from Shilgengar, it will not see those counters coming into play on your creatures. So in this scenario, you would need to blink it or time it after another mass reanimation. But either way, it doesn't matter because this effect is just bonkers. This is a flyer that can remove all of your finality counters, and this includes killing all planeswalkers by removing all of their loyalty counters. This is strong, hilarious, and probably the most fun card in this entire deck. As I've said many times, we are in a blink deck, so we need some highly synergistic blink spells that help us rinse and repeat the fun that Shilgengar has granted us in this deck. A perfect example is Flicker Wisp, a 3/1 elemental creature for 1 generic and 2 white. It has flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Abdel Adrian, Gorian's Ward, allows us to exile any number of creatures we control. And another mass blink effect can be found on Lumbering Battlement, which can get massive from all the creatures it's temporarily exiling. And then we have Old Felidar Guardian, which is a blink card that can get busted incredibly fast. We chose not to include the immediate return blink creatures to avoid infinite blinking combos, but if you're into that type of thing, then absolutely go for it. Now let's chat some spells, and given we need plenty of ways to blink these creatures, this is how we'll leverage most of our instants and sorceries in this deck. Eerie Interlude fits the mold of the perfect blink spell in this deck. For 2 generic and 1 white, exile any number of target creatures you control. Return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This allows us to exile any number of creatures, especially ones with finality counters on them. The power of this card is that it's at instant speed, giving us plenty of options of how we use it. One option here allows us to simply respond to a creature, or more importantly our commander, being targeted for removal, blinking it and thus avoiding the unwanted spell or ability targeting it. But if your commander is being targeted for removal, you won't just likely blink it with a card like Eerie Interlude. Instead, you want to net as much value as possible. If you have 3 hybrid mana to activate Shilgengar's second ability, sacrificing a bunch of creatures and then mass reanimating them. Then if you have a card like Flicker Wisp in your graveyard, you won't even have to use the blink spell. You can stack your trigger so the target creature will get blinked by Flicker Wisp and avoid the original target spell altogether. But if you don't have a card like Flicker Wisp, then cast a card like Eerie Interlude after all the creatures have been sacrificed, then reanimated, netting yourself a ton of value, and removing all of the finality counters on your creatures and fizzling the spell or original ability that was targeting your commander to begin with. This example alone is why this deck is so much fun. Other similar yet different cards to Eerie Interlude are Ghostway and Semester's End. Lae'zel's Acrobatic is also similar but potentially much better depending on the circumstances. An instant for 3 generic and 1 white. Exile all non-token creatures you control, then roll a d20. If it rolls 1 to 9, return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. If you roll anywhere from 10 to 20, return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control, then exile them again. Basically, roll a d20 and you either get 1 blink round or 2 blink rounds. And if you do get 2 rounds, it's going to be a lot of extra value depending on what's on the battlefield. Now, Second Sunrise can be used to quote-unquote blink our creatures without finality counters on them by sacrificing them to Shilgengar, then casting Second Sunrise to bring them back without needing to use blood tokens or deal with new finality counters. Brought Back is also a good utility card in a pinch. For 2 white, it reads, choose up to 2 permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped. So this helps us bring back non-creature permanents as well, pointing out that both of these effects work on lands, allowing you to target any fetches that you crack this turn, increasing your total land count. Similar is also Faith's Reward and Cosmic Intervention, but we'll cover these a bit more in depth in the section about our mono white ramp package. Another round is an exile spell but at sorcery speed. For double X, 2 generic and 1 white, it reads, exile any number of creatures you control, then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control. Then repeat this process X more times. This card is not as flexible as its instant speed counterparts, but can be a potential win con in the late game if you're using it to clear the board state by mass removing or exiling your opponent's creatures, or by abusing cards like Bishop of Wings, Righteous Valkyrie, and Veto Throne of the Dusk Rose. And of course, there are a couple of non-blink spells that we want to call out as well. Toxic Deluge is our board wipe, helping us get around indestructible creatures. Swords to Plowshare is targeted exile, and we have Lich King's Conquest, which can act as an alternative way to turn our blood tokens into mass reanimation effects if Shilgengar gets removed. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and/or tokens. Return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Speaking of artifacts, our artifact package here is pretty straightforward. Of course, some mana rocks and lightning greaves, but it is worth calling out that we have Inspiring Statuary, a 3-drop that reads, non-artifact spells you cast have improvise. Your artifact can help cast these spells. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. So we can then tap our blood tokens without sacrificing them to help reduce the cost of all of our artifact spells. Pretty damn sweet. And we have Golden Argosy to help us blink our creatures. But we are blinking them on a boat, a 4-drop legendary artifact vehicle. It's a 3/6 when it's crewed, and it has whenever it attacks, exile each creature that crewed it this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This provides us excellent value and is honestly pretty funny. And even though this only has crew 1, you can crew it with as many creatures as you want, and those creatures don't even need to have haste to crew it, then allowing you to blink all those creatures, which is just busted fun. We have Crucible of Worlds to help us play lands from our graveyard. This pairs incredibly well with fetches, helping us not miss a land drop. And speaking of lands, let's talk about our mana base here, especially the sweet ramp packages that we have. This deck plays a unique and powerful mono white ramp package, utilizing effects like Brought Back, Faith's Reward, Second Sunrise, and Cosmic Intervention. We can use several fetch lands at once, get our lands, then return all of those fetch lands back into play. Cosmic Intervention can be a particularly powerful version of this effect since its effect will return the fetch lands untapped at the beginning of the next end step, but its exile/return effect will still be active until the turn actually ends, meaning you can crack fetch lands for a second time, specifically during the end step, and Cosmic Intervention will return them an additional time at the beginning of the next turn's end step. For example, if you cast Cosmic Intervention with 2 fetch lands and 2 other lands in play, each of those fetch lands will be able to get 2 lands each and will still come back into play, taking you from 4 lands to 8 lands with a single spell. And you can even use these spells to bring back creatures that you sacrificed or were removed that turn, in addition to using them to ramp to maximize your value. If there is an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, our own or an opponent's, or Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, we can tap our fetch lands for mana, allowing us to keep our fetch lands around until we find one of our brought back effects. And additionally, you don't have to pay life to use the mana. Like I said before, we are playing Crucible of Worlds to replay our fetch lands, making it so we never miss a land drop. At least hopefully. Sun Titan, Shepherd of the Cosmos, Angel of Indemnity, and Sarah Paragon can all take advantage of our fetch land count. All of these ramp and fetching effects allow us to get 7 planes quickly and enable one of the most powerful non-man Lana effects, Emery, the Sky Ruin. Another land worth noting is Mistveil Plains. It's a plane, so it is fetchable, and it allows us to shuffle any of our powerful non-permanent cards back into our deck, as well as saving a card from potential graveyard hate. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth allows all of our fetch lands to tap for mana without having to sacrifice them. And you know, when paired with Cabal Coffers, it taps for a ridiculous amount of mana. Command Beacon allows us to ignore commander attacks, which you know we love to do. And since we have so many ways to recur our lands, we essentially never have to play command attacks after we get out our Command Beacon. Seraph Sanctuary will gain us a lot of incidental life as all of our angels are played, brought back, or blinked, making it even easier to get our effects that need life gain to trigger. Ghost Quarters is great at answering any powerful lands that our opponents have, but it can also act as a fetch land for ourselves if we don't have any of our land recurring effects. Urza's Cave will get any of these lands that we'll need. Usually this should be prioritizing Urborg, Cabal Coffers, or Emeria the Sky Ruin. But since it's fairly easy for us to recur our lands, it's not hard to use Urza's Cave several times in a single game. Now this deck is truly fun to play. This deck does fall in the realms of techie, meaning that it will test your knowledge of how to stack triggers and your understanding of how to leverage the power of responding to your opponents. It will require some practice to learn how to best leverage this deck's tricks. You will love playing this deck if you enjoy having options and being able to adapt to whatever your opponents play. If you're new to this playstyle of deck, be patient with yourself, because it'll take some time to figure out the specifics on how to play this deck to its full potential. But honestly, that's the best part of playing Commander, right? Just know that whatever dedication you sink into this deck will be returned with a fun playstyle and memorable games. But now let's talk about how to actually pilot this deck. Most important is to play out your early curve creatures and develop your mana base. Use your creature ETBs to control the early board state, setting yourself up for big turns when you finally play out and activate your commander's strong abilities. Try to save fetch lands if you can for your mono white ramp effects. Don't sweat it if you need to use the mana, but remember, if anyone has an Urborg or a Yavimaya, you can tap your fetches for mana without cracking them, unless you need the white mana. You do not need to play Shilgengar until you have enough creatures to make 6 blood tokens. Often this will be 1 or 2 angels and maybe another creature or 2. If you are worried about a removal spell on Shilgengar, then you can wait until you have 8 mana available so you can play Shilgengar while still having 3 mana available to respawn and use its abilities to avoid a removal spell. Once your Shilgengar engine is online, you can control the board with your removal ETBs while you smack your opponents in the air. Archangel of Thrun and or Vito Thorn of the Dusk Rose combos will end the game very quickly if you have any of your life gain effects. Or you can go wide with cards like Abdel Adrian, Bishop of Wings, Thalis, or Resplendent Angel. Now you are ready to slay some angels, reanimate them from the grave, all while leveraging the power of a Blink deck. Thank you to my co-writer, lead brewer of this deck, and the dude himself, Sasha Jelten. I'm Nicplz, thank you so much for joining me. Now go build this deck full of sin and have some fun.